Hello, and Christ is in our midst. Well, this is a strange place, you might say, to have a story from the Gospels, but I'll explain why. This is the bathroom. This is the bathroom, the men's room at Holy Ghost Church. And, you know, it's a necessary place, but you wouldn't want to live here. And you certainly wouldn't want to have your job being here all the time, living here and cleaning. Now, it's a sad thing that there's some people in the world who have to do that. But you wouldn't want that, especially if you're thinking about where you live now, with your home, with your parents. You wouldn't want to be living in a bathroom and cleaning the bathrooms all the time and having very little to eat. Well, this is a story about a young man, a boy who grew up to be a young man, who wasn't living in a bathroom, but he was living with a lot of pigs. He was living with pigs. His job was to feed the pigs, but he couldn't even get the food that they ate. It was such a terrible way of living. But let me go back to the very beginning of the story. The story is called the story of the Prodigal Son. It also can be called the story of the merciful Father. I'll explain what that's about. And Jesus told the story to a group of people around him about how much love God has, even when people have gone far away from him. So the story is this, that there were two sons, they were grown up. We don't know what happened to the mother, but probably she died earlier, but they were alone living with their father. And they lived in a very wealthy household. They had lots of possessions, they had lots of servants. But the younger son was getting more and more irritated being at home. Maybe you felt sometimes irritated being at home, wanting to run away. Well, he decided one day that he couldn't take it anymore. He was so angry and upset about whatever it was at home that he had to leave. So he came to his father and said, "Give me the inheritance." Now, usually you get an inheritance after someone has died. So he's asking his father to give it now, before he's died. So the father took all his possessions, his money, and he divided it equally between the young son and the older son. And he gave all the money to the younger son, who then just left after a few days. And no one heard back from him they thought he was dead. They thought he was dead because he was just gone. Well, it turns out that he had gone to a very, very far away place. And he spent all his money. He had such a great time having parties. He had lots of friends because he could give out his money all the time. He didn't have to work. But after a while, he used up his money. And there was a famine in that country that he was in. And he tried to find a job, but it was almost impossible to find a job. The only job he could find was taking care of pigs. In the mud, in the smell, and he looked at the food that the pigs were eating and he wished he could have some of that, but no one gave it to him. And while he was there among the pigs, he thought to himself, what am I doing here? He thought of his father. He thought of his home that he'd grown up in. He said, my father has food and more than enough for everybody, including for his servants. I will get up out of this pigsty, and I will go back to my father, and I'll tell my father, I have sinned. I'll apologize. I have sinned before God and before you. I am not worthy to be called your son anymore. Just take me back as one of your hired servants. And so he picked himself up and started back. Let's demonstrate a little bit what that would look like a little bit. So he started on the way, and you can imagine all the thoughts going through his mind as he walked back from a very, very, very far away country, thinking about the life that he used to have in his father's home, but also thinking about how terribly he had treated his father and his brother, the family, and what he would say. And he kept repeating to himself, I'll tell him, I'm not worthy to be called your son anymore. Just take me back as one of your servants. And while he was still a long way off, the father saw him. And the father ran out to meet him. And the father ran out to meet him, and he hugged him, he kissed him, he was crying. He was so joyful to find his son. And he wouldn't even let the son have the words come out of his mouth. Just as soon as he started saying, I'm not worthy to be called your son, take me back as your servant, the father put his arms around him and immediately called his servants. And he said, bring him a special robe. Look, his clothes are all tattered. Put shoes on his feet because he's barefoot. Look how terrible he looks. He was so joyful. And then he said, go and have a party, organize a party, because my son was lost and is found. I thought he was dead, and he's alive again. And so they had this wonderful party going on with music and dancing, and the father just was so joyful to see his son back at home after all that time. But that wasn't the end of the story, because the older brother wasn't there at the time. The older brother was out in the fields working. The older brother had been there the whole time. And he came back from the fields, and he heard music and dancing going on. And he called one of the servants and said, what's going on there? And the servant said, your father is so happy. Your brother is back home again, and he's having a big party to celebrate. And the older brother was just furious. When the servants went back in the house, they told the father that the brother was out in the field and wouldn't come in and join them in the party. And so the father left the party, walked out to the field, and came to the son, his oldest son, and he said, come in, your brother who was lost is here again. But the older brother was angry. He said, I have stayed with you all these years. I was working with you. I did everything you wanted. And here this son of yours, he wouldn't even call him his brother, this son of yours has spent all your money, and now you have a big party for him? You've never given me a party. And the father, who loves his older son, he said, son, you are always with me. Everything that I have is yours. But this is your brother, and he was lost and is found. We thought he was dead, and he's alive again. And shouldn't we rejoice at that? Well, the end of the story, we don't know what it is. We don't know whether the brother went in or not. But I hope he went in, and I hope that whenever we're with somebody that we think might have been lost, that we also will have the same kind of joy to receive them back again. Because the story is not just about the son who was lost, but it's especially about the mercy and love and compassion and generosity of the Father. Christ is in our midst.